Now in this video, what we're going to discuss is a heated debate that occurred on Twitter in the last few days, last few weeks, right? Around Elon Musk and Vivek. Now Elon Musk and Vivek, what they were doing is they were discussing the benefits of HB1 visas, right? Or H1-B visas. And essentially this involves a lot of workers coming from India, moving to America to work for relatively low wages and work in the tech sector. And there's different perspectives here, and I'm going to discuss some of the different views here. Now, essentially what Vivek and Elon Musk were pushing forward was that, well, we have a lot of Indian workers who are willing to work for slightly lower wages than the American workers in the tech industry in America and do relatively good quality work. And it was a quite heated debate because, of course, Elon Musk and Vivek and Trump and the whole movement was essentially focused on, well, we want to put America first and Americans first, give them good jobs, rebuild the middle class, which has kind of been destroyed. Now, from my perspective, just for full background, I am ethnically Indian. I have previously worked in America too. I was there for about 6 months or so, and I have worked in America. Just for your background, I'm not a H1-B Indian or someone who's worked in America for like many years or have taken advantage of that, but I thought it'd be interesting to hear a perspective of different people. We're going to start with what Vivek is thinking, and then we're going to move on to some Indian Americans and understand this heated debate. Now, from my perspective, I can kind of see it both ways. I understand if you're a CEO, a billionaire like an Elon Musk or a Vivek, and you've ran companies, you're currently running companies, you're looking for decent quality workers for relatively low wages, or as low as you can pay them, and that's why they might have a preference for Indian workers. Maybe their work quality isn't as high as some of these Americans, and their language and understanding might not be as developed, but at least from the perspective of a billionaire CEO, he might want those. He wouldn't mind making a slight compromise on the quality of work as long as he's getting it done for a slightly lower cost. But from the perspective of the Americans and the nationalist perspective, I understand their view too. You know, you want to be essentially working or living in a country where maybe people have similar backgrounds as you. You don't want to be undercut consistently for your wages. You can't really compete if you're an American who's in the middle class and you want to have a wife and kids and a decent house and a middle class lifestyle in the suburbs, working in the tech industry. You can't really compete with maybe an Indian worker who's moved from India to America, is willing to live in a house full of, 8 housemates, living really low cost, accepting low wages, effectively paid to have a visa in the country, and they'll work like slave labor because if they lose their job in America, they're going to be sent back home to India. And what they effectively do is work for relatively low wages, send a lot of their money back and build a decent life for themselves back in India, where they eventually intend on moving back to, or perhaps stay in the US. So I understand there's different perspectives here. It's not just economic, it's also cultural, social. There's a lot of type of heated debates around that, right? What type of country do you want in America? Do you want lots of migrants who might not fit in and integrate? And that's a lot of the undertone of the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again. And like I say, I'm quite neutral on this. Is that, okay, well, we're not just saying we need a nation with strong borders. There is a racial element to it, right? Well, we maybe don't want people from different backgrounds also being an American if they're not white, if they're not American. And that's kind of the undertone here. So it's very interesting to see different perspectives, because you will have many Indians who say, yeah, we support America. We support meritocracy. We don't support DEI. We want the hardest workers and the best quality workers to succeed. But then it's like, does that really benefit them? Who does it benefit? Does the West actually want, or does America actually want meritocracy if it doesn't benefit the people in that country, right? Do you want meritocracy in America if Americans aren't at the top of that, or white people aren't at the top of that? And it, makes people quite sensitive, because they don't want to discuss it, because, it's very convenient for the right wing or some of the prominent voices, right, to focus on meritocracy and things like that. But if you're not at the top of that meritocratic hierarchy, or there are Indians who you might consider have less intelligence, some of the views on the right wing do have that type of perspective, can outwork you and outsmart you, or work for lower wages. I mean, There's a lot of elements around that and how people might perceive that. So let's focus on what Vivek has to say here. And I think Vivek has a fair criticism of American culture, right? I think in the past, the American culture used to be focused on greatness, strength, and being smart and things like that. But over the time, it's kind of been worn down, right? And it's kind of more about a lazy consumer, mediocre culture. And I understand on the right, you're trying to fight against it, but we have to be really honest about the critical elements of American culture, not just, oh, it's woke, oh, there's DEI, oh, there's too much feminism or liberalism. Like, there really is a mediocrity that didn't just appear in the last decade. It's been building for several decades, right? And he's talking here about, a key part comes down to the C word, culture. And he's talking about how there's culture in America, consumerist culture, the kind of 90s culture, like saying here, where it's focused on me over excellence, kind of being cool rather than being smart. He's talking about there's a culture that promotes or celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad, right? In sense, is focused on who's the popular, attractive woman or the cool Chad, a jock type of guy over the smart guy, right? And which is true. I mean, he's mentioning shows here, Boy Meets World, Zack and Slater, like the cool guys in Saved by the Bell were viewed quite favorably when you compare it to Screech, who was the kind of smart, kind of nerdy kid. And there's many different examples of this. We always see this in culture, from American culture. The smart kid is kind of a loser, he's a nerd, doesn't have good social skills, he's not popular. But those type of guys you might see, they tend to win over the long term, even though they're considered kind of losers. And girls might see these type of guys as lames at high school, but they typically do well, at least from a middle class perspective, right? And get a steady corporate job. And he talks about here, I know multiple set of immigrant parents in the 90s who actively limited how much their kids could watch those TV shows, precisely because they promoted mediocrity and their kids went on to become widely successful STEM graduates. And that's true. I mean, like I say, I'm ethnically Indian. I've been in London for the majority of my life. And even then, my parents didn't say what TV shows I could and couldn't watch. But I'm like, what's the underlying message of TV shows like Friends, some of these kind of high school dramas that you typically watch at, Saved by the Bell, things like that. You have to think about what is the underlying message here. And I'd encourage you all to do that, right? And I really think about these type of TV shows that kind of glorify doing nothing, right? Just kind of not being driven, not being focused on accomplishments. Friends, Seinfeld, tons of TV shows they had in the UK, which you might not be familiar with, like Grange Hill, Biker Grove. I'm sure some people remember this. Nothing of this was really focused on, okay, this had to be the smartest or the strongest or the best. It's a culture of equality, mediocrity, downward-looking, stagnating culture. It's all about elevating the weakest type of, or gossip, or popularity. Like I say, nothing was focused on excellence and greatness. Now, when you compare this modern culture to previous cultures like Greek culture, the Greek gods, things like this type of strength culture or being the smartest, Aristotle. And you can go through any culture and look at this. You can go in Indian culture, we had Swami Vivekananda. You have all these kind of philosophers and smart, strong, successful people that were glorified. But you don't have a culture of that now. It's kind of, like I say, it's who can become popular and viral and things like that. You see this on TikTok, and it's not a culture of aspiration, of building, business, intelligence. And there's that common talking point that comes across on the right, which is fair, where the Chinese version of TikTok is focused on teaching kids, right? It's all about these quick lessons that are provided on TikTok, and those are the type of things that go viral on Chinese TikTok. Whereas in the West, it's all about kids dancing and kind of inappropriate type of music and things like that, right? So like I say, what is the Western culture, right? A lot of it's focused on pandering to, like I say, liberalism, feminist, equality beliefs. I sometimes when I go for walks around London, and you can probably see it around areas you live, sometimes I see that the schools, and they have their banners outside, primary schools for, of course, kids from the younger ages, I don't know what you call it in the US, between, say 6 to years old, and then even high schools for, like, let's say 12 to 16-year-olds. I look at what are the kind of banners they put outside, and a lot of these talking points are equality, diversity, we need to view everyone as equal, and I understand that, but shouldn't the kind of culture be pushing for greatness, to be the best sports person, to be the best like he says, Math Olympiad, spelling bees, things like that. There's no real culture pushing people to be great. And I believe there's a agenda there. It's about this system realizes to control people. They really want people to be average. That's the goal, to push you to be average and put so many loopholes and booby traps and throughout your life, high tax, political correctness to kind of stop you from really growing and being the best creative person or the best entrepreneurial person you can. So you have to jump these hoops, and the culture is really glorifying that, right? I want you to think about something like Friends or Seinfeld. What's really going on there? And I understand it's a comedy show. Not everything has to be about excellence and greatness, but even when you compare it to a couple decades ago, TV shows like Gladiators, even some of the what I would consider loose counterculture, like on YouTube, the fitness YouTubers, a lot of those things aren't really glorified too much. And when they do become mainstream, it's always focused on vanity rather than strength or honor or virtue. You know, are we glorifying virtuous women or kind of vapid, vain women? Are we glorifying smart or strong men or kind of the superficial men like a Dan Blazerian type of thing? So it really does raise some key points around culture, right? He's talking here about TV shows like Friends. And he's saying most normal American parents look skeptically at those kind of parents, you know, kids or parents who push their kids to be great or to be super smart and focus on studying and things like that. And he says here, normalcy does not cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent. And if we pretend like it does, we'll have our asses handed to us by China. And this could be our moment to awake from our slumber and be great, right? And focus on not normalcy, not mediocrity, focus on excellence, nerdiness over conformity, hard work over laziness. And all these culture aspects are good. And he's being fair when he's critical of US culture, even though I understand being someone of Indian descent, it's kind of Americans or white people might not want to hear it from him. They might not mind hearing Tucker Carlson or a person being critical of it, or even a Candace Owens, who's more kind of integrated in American culture than someone who comes across like a foreigner, right? Now, I think you can implement those type of practices within American culture, and you do see a lot of support from maybe men or right wing and some of the women who really want more of this culture, right? A culture of standards, a culture of shame, where if people are doing inappropriate things, they should be shamed and kind of ostracized or exiled from society. You're not treated as part of society. Do you want a Sexy Red, for example, or a Megan Thee Stallion, Cardi B, that type of culture? Do you really want it to be glorified in your society, right? Do you want kind of looking at that from the man's perspective? And I'm not knocking video games or anime or things like that, but do you want this type of kind of consumerist culture for men just sitting at home playing video games to be glorified and normalized over, you know, maybe a man focusing on his health or building a business? It's like, what type of culture are you encouraging? Now, I think you can encourage these aspects within American culture without bringing in, you know, hundreds or thousands, however many it is, of Indian workers on H1-B1 visas. So his criticism of American culture is correct, but it's not really that justifies bringing on tons of Indian workers. The way I would see it is what you should do is, at this point, if you don't have these type of skilled workers, which I believe you do have in the US, these billionaires don't want to pay a fair middle class wage, then what you could do is over the course of say 5 to 10 years is build that skill set, build that culture, which you like already see coming up, you know, quite quickly. Many people are focused on self-improvement of one form or the other, and rely on your American workers rather than being dependent on the Indian workers, right? So I'm, like I say, ethnically in. Vivek, of course, it also is that. I've worked, as I say, on a H3 visa in the US, and I found it quite interesting comparing and contrasting US work culture to that of the UK and other places I've worked. US personality types, typically more confident, more bold, more direct in the office compared to, like, let's just say slightly more passive aggressive environments in the UK, in the workplace. So it's quite interesting, right? And I want to give you a very interesting perspective of someone who's independent of the establishment. Now, people who are independent of the establishment, depending on how you look at it, might be someone like an Andrew Tate, someone like Alex Jones, Fuentes, people like that, whether you agree with them or not. And this is a good example of someone who's been successful. He's ethnically Indian, and he's essentially the real deal, right? Shiva Ayyadurai is a successful Indian who's been in America for life. He actually invented email. I know that might sound hard to accept or understand, but essentially what he did was he developed the initial form of email, and he actually fought a court case to win the rights to say he is the authentic inventor of email, right? All email services and things like we used many decades ago, back in 1978. He designed the initial idea for that, right? And then also after that, he worked as an entrepreneur and innovator. He studied at MIT. He has a PhD in biological engineering, very successful financially too. He's come up with many business tech companies such as Cytosolve, focusing on computational systems and biology, AI, customer service and analysis tools like EchoMail. He's an author, he's a speaker. He has this kind of training program online to help people see through how this system is kind of rigged, understanding technology, medicine, the power structure. He's been a very successful person, but because he is not part of the establishment, the elite, however you want to call them, he's kind of pushed to one side. He's ran political campaigns, and he's been very successful, at least on building online platforms. He's got 244,000 YouTube subscribers. I say MIT, PhD, very successful. But what's interesting about him, and interesting about me and other people you probably listen to if you're in this part of the internet, is that, it's very important to listen to experts who are anti-establishment, right? Vivek is going to parrot the Trump talking points or the right-wing talking points, which is funded by billionaires and trillionaires and people we don't even have the name of, right? Of not just but power structures beyond them, secret societies, things like that. But anytime anyone's super smart or super successful in some way, shape or form, and they're willing to speak out the truth, you should really pay attention to them, because when the media runs a smear campaign on them, it's typically because they're smart and they're not part of the establishment, right? So we're going to listen to what you have to say here. And he has an interesting contrasting point, which is, again, against kind of migration to the West.
Brainiac, my dad. So during the period of the 70s and 80s, the American immigration system allowed only the best. In the 90s, they needed more computer scientists, technical engineers. If you remember, the Y2K was coming. People thought the world was going to blow up. All the computers would not work with the 2000 bug. And the .com was occurring in the mid-90s. So the gates were open for H1-Bs. And the predominant number of people that came were this next wave of Indians. But I got to tell you, the next wave of Indians who came were not the creme de la creme, okay? And we'll talk about it after Suresh gives what is the H1-B. The people that came were just trying to get out of India. Many of them trying to get any angle to get to the United States. And they came through an ecosystem of outsourcing companies, body shops, brokers, but it was intended for U.S. employers. I had a company then called EchoMail for real employers to get really good people from India. And we would have, I think I brought in about 5 or 10 H1B people. But what ended up happening was these big outsourcing companies funded by Silicon Valley, these big brokers, scammed the entire H1B system. And we'll talk about that. And what you ended up happening, the end state was you got all these Indian niggas coming here. Most of them houses, who didn't give a fuck about America, who didn't give a fuck about India. They came here and they would send pictures back to on Facebook to their family back in India, how they got in their new Toyota car and how they were driving around, never integrated into American life. Talk about this country. And this is by and large. There could be some exceptions, but very into this very insulated life of taking money from the United States, shipping it back to India, and work for anything, indentured servants. Then you're going to understand how Silicon Valley, Elon Musk, Vivek the Snake, and all of these people profited from this. All the people who funded Trump profited from all of this. And then we're going to talk about how this latest H1B discourse that's taking place is nothing distraction to distract you and the American workers and workers, all backgrounds, not to unite, while the Silicon Valley has been raping the American people for the last 70 years. That's what we really need to talk about. Why have wages really been in decline? Here's Suresh, who came from India. And by the way, Suresh is one of the rare ones who was one of the best of India. He went to Anna University, was a gold medalist. The H1-B program was to identify people like him, not scammers. 99.999% of these Indians will not do any of that. They're little spineless assholes.
So he's talking about how these workers would come here, these Indian workers who'd come for low salaries, relatively low quality work, but just get enough done to keep the company happy. And they would not be highly technically skilled. They would be social climbers. And I think that's the important point of comparison, is they're social climbers. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. There are some Indian workers or migrant workers who would come to kind of add value, do something productive, integrate to some extent into a country. But then there's social climbers. They want the fancy job title? They want maybe a PhD. They want a expensive car and a big house, but they're not actually adding value. They're like this pointless mid-level bureaucracy that you see across the West now, whether it's in politics or in major corporations. They might not be the most productive, but they've got all the trappings of success, all the appearances of success, but they're not actually adding a lot. And you see this all the time with intellectuals and academia, all these type of things, right? And he's mentioning these outsourcing companies. Now, a lot of these outsourcing companies, they do run scams. They find these cheap, low quality workers from abroad, places like India and things like that, and they might bring them into to do work in America. So it's the whole idea that it's like, what type of personality type are you bringing into the West as a migrant? Are you bringing high skilled workers that are going to integrate, or these type of people who kind of work but don't really produce good quality work, and they're just sending money back, and they're just cheap labor for major corporations? And it brings us on to the kind of key point he's going to go on to next, which is around, when it comes to capitalism, capitalism is not this kind of utopia world that people want to present it. Firstly, we don't live under capitalism. We have crony capitalism, because we had genuine capitalism when these big corporations and these banks who are doing all types of inappropriate activity were actually under capitalism. They wouldn't be getting bailouts. They wouldn't be deemed too big to fail. So we don't have capitalism, we have crony capitalism. And I think there's a key contrast, and you're going to see this build and build in the West. It's an important point for everyone who's listening to this. The contrast between looking out for your countrymen and capitalism. So countrymen versus capitalism. I think that's going to become a stronger narrative, and more people are going to be like, well, okay, maybe it benefits capitalism, major corporations, if you bring in tons of low-cost migrant workers, but there's people here who want to work and they can't work, right? There's people who maybe went to high school and college and university. They want a side job. They want to work in retail and pay some of their bills, but they can't get those jobs because low-skilled migrant workers have taken all the jobs in cafes and restaurants, and maybe some of the kind of lower wage, working in McDonald's, things like that. Many of the younger people who get their initial work experience can't do that now. And, if you want capitalism, to what extent do you want to have it? Do you want to have capitalism within a country where you do kind of cap migration, you do limit the level of within the country, you do allow a fair level of competition and capitalism within the country, but you do have some protectionism where we're not going to have migrant workers, or very small amounts, so people can compete and live a decent quality of life within their country and have more localism rather than globalism. And localism would mean more local businesses, more small scale kind of farms, and your local butcher, your local dairy farm, things like that. And that's really a more positive way of living, rather than everyone in the world being in a hyper competitive environment. And if you're an American working in tech, you got to compete with an Indian worker who's willing to work for a fifth of your wage in India, where his living costs are lower, and he'll be willing to come here and completely undercut you. That's not really a healthy way of building a society. So let's continue to listen here.
These people who come here on H1Bs, that, let's say, Alan, you were there, right? And you came here. Alan's a young kid. This broker is like the slave trader. He's placing him in a U.S. company. Alan owes everything to that broker, his future, his life. He's got to pay that. The money, his salary is actually given to the broker. So the guy may be living in a small dormitory in the United States, and the broker sometimes would hold the money, hold salary, okay? So these indentured servants are beholden to who? The broker. And those individuals would eke out a living, and then at the time, over time, by early 2000, mid 2000, as these H1B people are here, some of them became mid-level managers. And guess what? They start outsourcing labor from the H1B companies back to these outsourcing companies. Okay, and the ratio, Suresh, I think was 1 to 9. For every one H1-B job here, there were 9 Indians in India. Okay, hope this is all making sense.
Quick question here.
Yeah.
Because this is kind of blowing my mind. So you're telling me that when these Indians on these H1B visas are here in the United States, a majority of their income is still going to these essentially slave merchants in India.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh
slave merchants. So, for example, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of India, his daughter, his wife was of one of the biggest slave merchants of India, Infosys. You can look it up. Infosys built a massive company in India doing this kind of outsourcing slave merchantry. Okay, got it. And the daughter of a multi-billionaire of India is the wife of Rishi Sunak, which is the Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister of Britain. Got it. Got it. All right. Now, I was in the middle of this in 1993. I had started a tech company in the United States. People had invited me to go to India. I remember going to India. There was a company with 300 people. The guy wanted me to buy his company. He was going bankrupt, but he was trying to do everything, Alan. And I wanted to do real innovation. Out of those 300 people, I fired 90% of them, Alan. Most of them were useless. Their degrees were useless in India. And I kept maybe 10 of them. And I wanted to do product innovation. So I actually bought some really good people here on H1Bs. Wow. I didn't do with brokers, Alan.
Yeah.
I brought them here to help the American economy, okay? Not the other way around, okay? Very important to understand this. So what ended up happening was by 2020, Silicon Valley, now this is a third ecosystem, David Sachs, Vivek the Snake, Elon Musk, all of the backers of Trump now, okay? All of these scumbags in Silicon Valley, they all profited immensely from the slave trade, Alan. They profited from investing in those outsourcing companies, which grew enormously. They got traded on the Indian stock market and the US stock market. Okay?
Dude.
All right. So Indian Silicon Valley people who funded Trump made billions, trillions off investing in Indian outsourcing and broker companies. Understand this, including all of Elon Musk's friends. Please understand this. And who's the middle little people here, these spineless Indians, the second wave of Indians who came here, Alan and Suresh and everyone else listening, who are not like my parents, devoted to America to fight. They're coming here. Oh, we're so happy to be in America.
So he's making a lot of good points here, right? So these broker companies, they would be outsourcing a lot of jobs to kind of cheaper workers in India, even if they're based in the US. So this whole indenture servants kind of exploitation of migrants when the migrants don't win, and also a lot of the US American citizens don't win, and it's like the middleman taking advantage of these kind of low wage workers, right? And like I say, it kind of destroys the concept of a strong nation, destroys the middle class in the West, really exploiting low cost workers from India is a bit like a pyramid scheme, right? And the whole term of slave merchants, having these workers living in fear, whether they're living in the US and kind of delegating some of their work back to lower cost workers back in India. If they lose their job in the US, they get deported, they get exploited by companies. It's really the companies and the corporations who are winning, not the US workers or really the Indian workers, even though they might be getting a slightly higher wage than if they were in India, right? He mentions, a lot of these people, and I see there's a certain personality type really with, and I can probably get away with saying this because I'm ethnically Indian, of a Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak was the Prime Minister of the UK for I think several years, recently changed last year. But his wife, like he said, was one of these slave merchant outsourcing companies, right? And the truth is there's many Indians in these type of mid-level or senior level roles within society, and they do questionable things to maintain their social status. And he discusses throughout this video the concept of the caste system and how this is kind of exploited. And you have a similar thing in the UK with the class system. With America, you have a similar kind of elite who like to exploit everyone and pit different groups against each other. And yeah, it's very highly suspect. Anytime you're dealing with anyone, I would say like a Vivek or a Rishi Sunak, who was the Prime Minister of the UK for several years, this type of car salesman vibes, anytime you get this kind of super clean cut, saying all the right talking points that you want to hear, you really got to think carefully. What is their background? How do they make their money? What's actually going on here? Are they benefiting from lying to you? This is really important to really think about what's going on here, and particularly that type of demographic, which I would say Indians who are super focused on being social climbers, buying items of social status. They're buying an expensive car because it kind of raises their social status, has those fancy job titles. There really is a red flag to look out for there and understand their motives.
Trump has a major problem because he's talking deportation, and he's got Elon Musk and fucking Vivek the Snake. By the way, aside on Vivek the Snake, that guy should be fucking deported. As I said, here's a guy, I mean, he's been shoved down the throat of American people. 99% of people hear this guy and they want to vomit. How many people want to vomit when they see Vivek the Snake speak? Everyone I know wants to vomit, okay? But it's like a bad song you keep playing over and over and over again, and you inadvertently start humming it. That's Vivek the Snake. Here's a guy, him and his mother made up a fake drug. Bought a useless drug that failed 4 clinical trials and then presented it as this big Alzheimer's drug, took the company public, made billions, and then crashed the stock from $200 to 0.33 cents, something like that. That's Vivek the Snake. That is a model Indian. And so Vivek the Snake is a guy that made money from scamming people, and yet he's talking about meritocracy. Elon Musk is talking about meritocracy. Everything he does is scamming. His first company was an utter failure. The code sucked. His father had to fund the company. He had to sell it to Peter Thiel. And Elon Musk, everyone must understand, is an actor. He hasn't built anything. All of his business are subsidized businesses from the American public. We also need to understand during the pandemic, Elon Musk and 600 billionaires made $2.3 trillion. And this comes down to the fundamental issue. And this is what everyone really should be listening to. They want the white American worker to go attack these Pajits, okay, as they call the Indian house niggas or the slaves, okay? And they don't want us to really look at the real plantation owners. The real plantation owners are for the last 70 years. And please, go do your own research. Go read the Rand report from 1970 till today, the last 54 years. Wages have been going down for the first and second income quartiles, which is the American working class, black, white, brown, all of them. In fact, each year, the wages have been going down for the first and second income quartiles. If you add up all those wages for the last 54 years, it comes down to $47 trillion. A beautiful analysis was done by the Rand Association or the Rand Corporation. That $47 trillion was unpaid wages to the American worker. As cost of living went up, the American workers' wages didn't go up. So if you are making $50,000 today, you should actually be making 120 grand. And all of this $47 trillion was given to the elites. So the elites in Silicon Valley, the elites in Boston, all these fucking people everywhere have been stealing from the American worker for the last 54 years. Why? Because they busted all the unions. All the existing unions all suck. There's no one fighting for the American worker. For the last 54 years, there have been at most 900 strikes by 2 million people. During 1900 to 1970, there were 250 million people in the United States fighting in 11,000 strikes. That's when the American working class was strong. When they fought, we win. This is
He's making a good point here again, right? Now, he's talking about deporting Vivek and things like that, and these very suspect people, Elon Musk being heavily reliant on government subsidies. And I always do think it's suspicious when we do see some of these characters who are like famous entrepreneurs and things like that, but they just seem to be actors, right? Is Elon Musk running Tesla, running Twitter or X, and he's on Twitter all day just tweeting around, maybe playing video games, aware of all the social, cultural issues going on in society. And we can say, of course, he's a manager, he's a CEO, he's delegating a lot of the work, he's overseeing some other people who be highly skilled experts, but it does seem suspicious, right? I mean, you know, all these public figures who seem to be super busy and geniuses, and they seem to be constantly involved in all these type of hot button issues and them online. It really doesn't make sense to me, right? I do think there is a fair argument to be made whether Elon Musk is an actor, to what extent he has achieved the things they say he's achieved, because now he's kind of like a defense contractor for Trump, essentially, or for the US government. I'm sure a lot of Tesla's cars are like surveillance systems, essentially. I'm sure Twitter is going to kind of operates like a tool like that, and the AI Grok is kind of based on, sourcing information from people's tweets and things. There's a lot of suspect behavior, the whole Neuralink thing, having that kind of an implant in your mind. These type of things, highly suspect what's actually going on here. And to what extent are, real wages actually going down? And he does make a point about, labor unions being quite effective in the past, how inflation has effectively heavily impacted people's wages. If you're making 50K a few years ago, the equivalent would be 120K these days. All the productivity gains have gone to the super rich, as he's saying, right? And the real issue in society, and so many issues people are dealing with, health issues, things like that, are linked to income inequality, which we're going to go into in a clip in a moment, right? And it creates a lot of stress. And the society's kind of been broken, and they're deliberately pitting different groups against each other, left versus right, men versus women, one race versus the other race, migrants versus citizens, things like that. And it's all obfuscating from the demographic, the elite, the Elon Musks of the world, who are kind of skimming off the top and making a lot of the money from this type of, say, migrant workers and things like that. It's not really the migrants who are benefiting dramatically. So, yeah, and what we see key thing here to look out for is all the people who is talking the right talking points, like an Elon Musk who's quite popular right now, right? Why is he talking about these talking points now? Why is it politically incorrect to say certain things a few years ago, but now you're allowed to say things like that, right? For example, in the UK, for many decades, for like 2 decades, you weren't allowed to be critical of the level of migration in the country, but now you're allowed to talk about it. So is it because it's now politically correct, or because they're pushing the powers that be, they're pushing for a conflict to occur within the Middle East, and all of a sudden it's politically correct to be critical of certain demographics? What's going on here, right? You really got to think about what's the bigger game getting played here. Now here we're going to get to the crux of the issue, and it really will drill down into your mindset and the mindset of other people watching this. Is be careful about getting dragged into like heated debates, or why the media is suddenly triggering your emotions or focusing on certain issues versus the other. Now, my general perspective, as I say, a country should prioritize its citizens and build a strong nation that is self-sufficient. You don't just be good at tech or good at finance. A country should effectively be able to be as self-sufficient as possible. Have highly skilled workers, a strong agricultural sector where you can provide food for your citizens, a decent middle class, an intelligent society, a civilized society. But this system doesn't profit from that. The system profits from dysfunction, divorce, dysfunctional kids, mental health issues, create an entire mental health industry, people's physical health issues, create a physical health industry, a massive big pharma industry. So this system manifests problems deliberately to keep it going and growing and growing. The more problems, the bigger the industries can be, rather than a more self-sufficient, decent living standard and healthy lifestyle for everyone. And countries that are thinking a bit ahead of the curve, even though they're not perfect, countries like China, to a certain extent Russia, they're more focused on being self-sufficient. They don't want to be as dependent as some of the Western countries are on having a lot of these issues. China's developing quite a significant agricultural industry to support its people, rather than be dependent on other countries for food, right? Now, in the West, it's completely dysfunctional. It's all about creating, like I say, a lot of these issues, income inequality, all these other health issues that the system profits off. And that's why they don't really care about the migrants. They don't really care about the citizens of the country, even if they're giving you those talking points. It's really about exploiting you. So let's listen to more about this context here.
In West Virginia, a male's lifespan in the United States is 62 years old. In Fairfax, Virginia, where it's 85. 22 years difference. Why? Income inequality. Let's talk about the real fucking thing that affects health. Not eating your fucking green tea. Yeah, we all want to eat well. We all want to eat organic food, but it's stress. Income inequality creates infinite amount of stress on the body. Talk to a mother who's trying to work hard. They can't afford fucking vitamins. What's going on right now? The goal is to eliminate working people. Do you understand what I'm saying? The goal is to eliminate as many workers as possible globally. So there are a number of ways that they're doing this. One is to take young people in the United States, 20 to 40-year-olds, and you will see this. Many of you, if you're listening, if you have a son or a daughter, many people are coddling their kids. They actually cannot do a lot of work anymore, okay? They're incapable. they've created, well, I'll tell you why. For the last 50, 60 years, they've created a culture of telling parents, oh, your poor Johnny is so smart. He's got ADHD. He can't focus. You know, he doesn't need to do that work. Please take care of him. Okay. Oh, putting people on disability, putting people on welfare, and giving people excuses why. So they've created a huge segment of the American workforce which doesn't work anymore. Meanwhile, and that job, getting people out of the workforce. The second job is to bring immigrants in, like the outsourcing immigrants or immigrants from Mexico, under fear. Oh my God, I made it across the border. I'm going to do some menial job. I'll do it for anything. Same with these Indian indentured servants. But most of the jobs that they do, majority of them, are very mechanistic, robotic jobs. You follow? That will also be replaced by robots and machinery. Momentum that's going to be a bloody fucking tsunami that's appearing. And very few people have the idea of what I'm talking about. It's like in 1993, when one of my customers was J.C. Penney, 1993, and I said, you know, you guys should get on the internet. You have the catalog business, you have this. Oh, we don't need to be on the internet. We're making so much money here. And we don't need an email address. People have no idea what is going to happen with AI and robotics, how many jobs it's going to replace. So the goal is to make sure the working people are fighting among each other while all their jobs are wiped out. That's what's fundamentally going on, okay?
So that's the final clip here, right? So like he says, income inequality creates stress, impacts people's health, and you particularly see this between people who are their 20s, 30s, and 40s. You see it throughout society. People's energy levels is low. They're feeling kind of depressed. And the three key points here, the deliberate dumbing down of the masses. And it makes sense what you're saying. What is the long game? And this is what I encourage you to do, rather than being caught up on what is the big debate of the day or the week. What is the long game this system's playing? You're deliberately dumbing down people, creating mass unemployment, replacing jobs with migrants first, then more AI, demoralizing young people, creating these type of young people who never really grow up and become responsible for themselves, living with their parents for long time periods, whether it's living in escapism, playing video games, traveling for the sake of traveling, things like that. And I'm not saying any of these things are bad, but the system is doing everything to prevent you from being self-sufficient, a self-sufficient person, growing your own food, being self-employed, things like that. It's always against that. It's always pushing against that. It wants you to create it. It wants to create a slave class, a slave underclass. And that's the key point here, right? Making people weak, dependent on welfare, feeding them tons of lies that are negative for their health, their mental health and physical health, giving people tons of excuses not to work, this type of victim culture. And I think there are legitimate reasons why people want to drop out: the high cost of living, low wages, things like that, high tax rate. But it's really like, what is this full forced attack on destroying you financially, socially, your mental health, things like that. And the second thing is making a good point here around migrant workers coming here and these systems or these companies exploiting them, realizing they're going to do anything and work for very low wages, be overworked, and overnight they could be easily replaced by AI and things like that. And he's, like I say, he's an accomplished person. He's well aware. He studies systems. His kind of training program online is around understanding these type of systems and how society works. So the same way he was ahead of the curve when it comes to internet, working with J.C. Penney, telling them to get on the internet before they actually did. He knows what he's talking about. So the long game is something he's very well versed in. And the third point is around making the working class fight amongst each other. As I say, you can see these type of manufactured talking points. There are valid points around, gender war, culture war, the elite's goal of depopulation and total control of humans. And that's what you should really focus on. What is the long game of these things? Because obviously everyone's going to be around for the next couple of decades, depending on your age, but you have to be aware of how it's pushing in certain directions and how you can focus on your freedom. Now, they're kind of interesting points that have come up around this debate and many interesting tweets. At the bottom, in the bottom right, you can see your job will be replaced by AI, Americans, Indians. Kind of a funny kind of commentary on this type of scenario. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, you see the Trump recovery he had after the attempt to end his life. You have the Indian flag, and then Vivek, Kash Patel, who's going to be the leader of, I think, the FBI or the leader of that department. And then the AI expert is also Indian. And then there's different perspectives here on the top left-hand corner. we can see two examples of Indians who are, I would give you examples who would be social climbers, focused on social status rather than adding value. These two people worked in Twitter before Elon Musk was there, and they were heavily focused on enforcing the establishment agenda of heavy censorship, things like that, removing people who are giving honest takes on the situations in 2020 onwards. So those type of people are not adding a lot to the country. So should they be allowed to be in the country? Should they be deported? Those are good examples there. And then in the top right hand corner, you see that no skilled immigrants in the US. Here's the kind of young talent we have in the US. So this is a tweet kind of critical of US workers and saying how migrant workers are more effective. It says, and these statistics, to what extent they're accurate or just based on kind of flawed polls and studies, but we'll see. It says 98% of Gen Z experience burnout at work, 23% face unmanageable stress, 48% feel drained, 6 in 10 employers report firing recent Gen X hirings, 75% of companies said that Gen Z hires were unsatisfactory, 39% lack communication skills, 46% lack professionalism. There's a cultural problem within the US when it comes to these younger workers. Immigrants are hungry, most Americans are simply not. Now, I believe those statistics are inflated. I've seen those in news articles around workers and Gen Z in particular. But like I say, the culture, and I don't want to say just the culture, but the socio-economic dynamics have really destroyed people, a lot of people in working age, in their 20s particularly, I would say, to kind of, not give them an opportunity or something worth working for. If the housing's unaffordable, the tax is high, the social dynamics between men and women are dysfunctional, people are kind of isolated and alone, you don't have healthy level of tribalism, healthy level of community, you're going to have these dynamics. People don't want to work anymore, right? And then, if you're not familiar with Balaji, he's a genius, basically. He's of Indian descent, and I think so. He's wrote books around being like a sovereign individual of the independent state and very pro crypto, pro decentralization. And his commentary is that, the basic issue is if America wants to run a global empire, and it does have 750 military bases worldwide, it has the world currency. If you want to have this, you need to have the strongest and the smartest, right? And in a sense, to a certain extent, that is dependent on migrant workers or being well integrated with the world if you want to have an American empire. And that's really how America operates. America, presents itself like a country, but these deep state interests, these intelligence agencies convenient overthrowing of third world country leaders overnight, CIA-backed coups, things like that, right? It's not really what we really see is kind of a divergence of interest. The Americans who want to look out for America and the American communities and workers and things like that. Then you have the American establishment, the deep state, things like that. And they don't care if American middle class is destroyed, right? They want to deliberately dumb you down, make you just work, consume, and have all these negative health impacts and financial impacts of being a slave to the system, right? And they deliberately weaken their own population. And that's what the deep state's done. And now it's kind of, you see these impacts when it comes to the quality of workers to a certain extent, right? And that's really what it comes down to, is that I've shared in this video the perspective of many different Indians, right? Balaji, Shiva, Ayyadurai, Vivek, some other tweets and things like that. It's like this system is playing a very tricky game. It's pushing so many conflicting narratives. Again, it's managed to pit Americans on the right wing against Indians on the right wing, rather than simply saying having a smart migration of worker policy, focusing on prioritizing American workers, and in some cases having some migrant workers, is not coming up with sensible policies. It's just feeding you lie after lie and creating more and more division. So let me know in the comments, how do you feel about H1-B Indians who might be taking American jobs, different perspective of Indians. And I have 2 other videos coming up in the next few days or weeks, where I'm going to give you the perspective of Black Americans and how they feel about some of these Indian workers and Indian culture versus American culture, and also the perspective of some white people who are more libertarians, more right-leaning type of people, and their perspective of these Indian migrant workers. So we're going to have different perspectives. It's going to be quite interesting to listen to. So stay tuned. It's 2025. Lots of interesting perspectives coming from me. I'm going all out this year, so I hope you can support the channel and let other people know. And I am someone who's worked in the finance industry for over a decade, Goldman's, Morgan Stanley, things like that. And I offer a career advice service. Let me know in the link in description. Feel free to book a session. I'll be happy to help you with your career and talk you through some of these challenging dynamics. Thanks for listening. 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and I'll see you next time.